Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the presentation of the Economic Outlook. Please take your seats, and we will be getting underway in just a moment. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the Economic Outlook presentation. It'll be in two parts today. You'll hear first from OECD Secretary General Matthias Cormann, followed by OECD Chief Economist Stefano Scarpetta. For those in the room and watching online, please be aware there is simultaneous interpretation, French and Spanish from the English. With that, we'll hand it over to the Secretary General.
Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to the launch of this OECD Economic Outlook. The title of our Outlook today is Under Pressure. That is not a rhetorical flourish. It is precisely where the global economy is at. For 5 years, the world economy showed remarkable resilience, absorbing a pandemic, an energy shock, and the fastest interest rate tightening in a generation. Global growth reached 3.4% last year. The technology sector was booming. AI-related investment was providing real momentum. And then in late February, the conflict in the Middle East escalated sharply. The Strait of Hormuz was effectively closed and has been ever since. And the consequences are now flowing through every corner of the global economy. The Gulf region is far more than an energy supplier. This slide illustrates the breadth of the exposure. Prior to the conflict, Gulf countries accounted for 26% of global oil supply and 31% of all liquefied natural gas. Global oil supply has since fallen by 13.5%. Gulf oil production is down 45%, but the disruption extends well beyond energy. Qatar alone accounts for around 35% of global helium exports. Helium being a critical input for semiconductor manufacturing, which is now under acute pressure, precisely at the moment when demand is surging from AI and digital infrastructure investment. That is, the upside and the downside risk are directly connected. The energy supply shock has produced sharp increases across the board. Brent crude rose to $118 US per barrel in late April, its highest level since 2022. It has remained above $90 for nearly 3 months. Diesel and jet fuel prices are around 50% higher than before the conflict, pushing up transport, aviation, and freight costs across the global economy. But the surge in commodity prices extends well beyond energy. Prices have risen by up to 55% for a range of non-energy commodities, highlighted on this slide. That means higher costs for fertilizers, digital technologies, automotive components, and chemicals. Inflation, which had been on a clear downward path, has turned. Since February, price pressures have risen in the United States, the Euro area, South Africa, Brazil, and India. Government support measures, price caps, subsidies, tax reductions have contained some of the increase. Without them, the picture would be worse. And of course, the impact will not fall evenly. Around 1/3 of OECD economies are projected to experience negative real wage growth this year. Workers in these countries will see their living standards fall, which is the human reality behind the inflation numbers in front of us. There's an important countervailing force in this picture. The technology sector, and in particular investment driven by AI, has been a significant engine of growth. Industrial production of computer and electronic products is substantially outpacing total industrial production. But as the helium and semiconductor point illustrates, this positive force is not insulated from the energy shock. Before turning to our projections, one important piece of context on trade policy. The effective tariff rate on United States merchandise imports was around 10% in April this year, down from around 18% a year earlier. This reduction has been positive for trade and growth and is one reason underlying momentum was stronger than expected before the conflict escalated. However, uncertainty remains high. The 10 percentage point tariff introduced by the United States following the Supreme Court's ruling on the International Emergency Economic Powers Act is due to expire in late July unless Congress extends it. How that is ultimately resolved will matter for the outlook. Our central projection, the relatively more time-limited disruption scenario, assumes energy prices evolve broadly in line with futures markets as of 26 May, with oil averaging $92 US per barrel this year and $80 next year. We project global growth of 2.8% this year and 3.1% next year compared to 3.4% last year. That is 0.4 percentage points lower for 2026 than we projected in February before the conflict escalated. On inflation, average G20 headline inflation is projected to rise from 3.4% last year to 4% this year, or 0.9 percentage points higher than our February forecast, before easing to 3.1% in 2027. In the United States, stronger energy sector exports will partly offset lower household purchasing power. GDP growth is projected to slow from 2.1% last year to 2% this year and 1.8% next year. In the euro area, growth is expected to ease from 1.4% in 2025 to 0.8% this year before recovering to 1.2% next year. Labour market resilience and next-generation EU spending will partly offset tighter fiscal policy in France, Italy, and elsewhere. Japan is among the economies most exposed to this conflict through energy imports and supply chains. Growth is projected to fall from 1.1% in 2025 to 0.6% this year, recovering to 0.8% in 2027. Domestic demand, supported by robust wage growth and energy subsidies, will provide some cushion. In China, growth is projected to ease from 5% last year to 4.5% this year and 4.3% in 2027, with high energy import dependence and falling real estate investment the primary drags. This outlook is surrounded by significant uncertainty, and the risks are predominantly to the downside. To illustrate the downside, we have developed a prolonged disruption scenario in which energy prices remain 50% higher than futures market prices imply from the third quarter of 2026 through to the third quarter of 2027. Under this scenario, oil prices would average $115 US per barrel this year and $119 next year. Global growth would fall to 2.1% this year and 1.8% next year. G20 inflation would increase to 4.4% in both years, and prolonged high energy prices and input shortages would also pose a particular risk to the technology sector and AI. Energy accounts for around 60% of data center operating costs, meaning a sustained shock would undermine the very growth driver that has been partly offsetting the disruption. The near closure of the Strait of Hormuz is squeezing fertilizer markets. Fertilizer prices have risen close to their 2022 peaks. Our estimates suggest that a sustained 47% increase in fertilizer prices, which reflects current market conditions, would raise agricultural commodity prices by around 8% next year. Wheat prices could rise by 13%. And this is not an abstract risk, it is a very real food security risk, and it will fall hardest on the most vulnerable economies and the most vulnerable households within them. Financial risks are also rising. Since late February, sovereign bond yields have increased across most economies, with pressure more pronounced at shorter maturities. That means governments are facing more immediate financing cost increases. This limits the fiscal space available to respond to the shock. In terms of policy priorities, the most important single thing that can be done to ease pressure on the global economy right now is to re-establish secure trade routes through the Middle East and protect energy infrastructure. As long as the disruption continues, every other policy response is managing consequences rather than addressing causes. On monetary policy, central banks in the major advanced economies have kept policy rates unchanged so far this year. If the energy shock remains contained and inflation expectations stay anchored, the rise in inflation may prove temporary and may not require a policy response. But if broader and more persistent price pressure emerge, adjustments will be needed, and of course central banks will need to remain vigilant and communicate clearly. On fiscal policy, the constraints are real and they are tightening. Total public debt in the OECD reached 111% of GDP at the end of last year, up from 74% in 2007. Spending pressures from population ageing, debt servicing and rising defence requirements are all pointed in the same direction. Stronger efforts to contain and reallocate spending, improve public sector efficiency and enhance revenues are essential, while preserving the growth potential on which debt reduction ultimately depends. In response to the energy shock, many OECD governments have introduced support measures for households and businesses. Our recommendation, targeted, temporary, with clear expiry mechanisms. Broad-based measures are fiscally costly and blunt the incentives to reduce energy use. Our analysis shows that of all energy support measures OECD countries have adopted in response to this conflict, a very high 55% have in fact been untargeted. At a time of constrained public finances, that level of inefficiency would seem unaffordable. Countries can reduce vulnerability to future energy shocks by diversifying their energy mix. Renewables accounted for just 6% of total energy supply across the OECD between 2019 and 2024. Nuclear energy, which accounted for only 9% of total OECD energy supply over the same period, down from 11% in the mid-1990s, is a vital tool for energy security, affordability and sustainability that deserves clear-eyed reassessment. Expanding nuclear capacity, including through small modular reactors, can provide reliable, low-emissions power that complements renewables and meets rising demand from digital technologies. Open markets and rules-based trade are among our most powerful tools for building resilience, and yet import restrictive measures are expanding rapidly. New restrictions introduced since 2009 now affect an estimated 19.7% of world imports, up from just 3.1% in 2016. That is a six-fold increase in less than a decade. New export restrictions in response to supply disruptions should be firmly avoided. They only exacerbate shortages. Constructive dialogue, making the trading system fairer and more resilient while preserving the benefits of openness, is the only durable answer. Finally, structural reform. Potential GDP per capita growth in the OECD is estimated at just 1.4% this year, down from around 2.2% back in the year 2000. The long-run productivity slowdown is the most important economic challenge most of our countries face, and it will not be solved just by managing the current shock. Our most consistent structural reform recommendations for countries: regulatory reform to lower entry barriers, reduce red tape and strengthen competition, and of course investment in skills through more effective education, lifelong learning systems. In closing, the energy shock from the Middle East conflict is real and serious. It is raising costs and uncertainty for households and businesses around the world. The tools to respond exist. Re-establishing secure energy supply routes, targeting support carefully, keeping monetary policy anchored to the data, putting public finances on a more sustainable path, diversifying energy sources, defending open markets, avoiding new export restrictions, and driving the structural reforms that determine long-run living standards. None of them are easy. All of them are necessary. So thank you very much, and I now hand over to our chief economist, Stefano, to talk to us, and then we will take your questions.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Good morning to all of you. It's a great pleasure to contribute to the presentation of our economic outlook. I think I would like to start with one of the messages that Secretary General just delivered. The evolving conflict in the Middle East has indeed become the main factor shaping the global economy. But I think it is important at the outset to recall that the world economy entered 2026 with pretty strong momentum. This was driven by strong investment, but also production of artificial intelligence, supporting financial conditions, and some easing of trade tensions. Since then, of course, the conflict has first and foremost brought a severe humanitarian cost, but also disruption in the shipping of energy and other essential inputs through the Strait of Hormuz, and damage to the energy infrastructure in the Gulf region. We do not know the extent of these damages, but probably will take time to repair them. These developments have led us to revise down our economic projections. We now expect a weaker economic growth, high inflation, and a more challenging economic environment. Let me shed some further light on our projection. Let me start actually with what I would consider a pretty benign scenario given the context. This is what we call the time-limited disruption scenario. Under this scenario, energy prices gradually fall in line with future markets, and energy production and trade in the Gulf economy progressively return to the pre-conflict level, starting from the second half of 2026. Even in this scenario, you can see that growth actually slowed down significantly in 2026, and this actually affects both OECD and non-OECD economies. We moved from 3.4% for the global economy to 2.8% in 2026, and in the OECD country from 1.8 to 1.5%. Now, under the assumption that energy price and fertilizer price will decline in the second half of 2026, we expect a little rebound in economic growth in 2027. We move to 3.1% for the global economy. Now, the Secretary General has already walked you through the tour of the globe, focusing on the major economy. Let me present in this table the detailed projection for the G20 countries. I will not go into the individual country projection, but what I'd like you to do is to focus on the red bubble. These are where we have revised downward our projection by 3 or more 0.3 percentage point compared to our December economic outlook. Now, what you can see in this slide is that for the G20 economies in 2026, we have 8 economies where we revised down our projection by more than 0.3 percentage point, and we have 3 economies for which we have revised down the projection in 2027. This clearly underlines the significant impact of the energy crisis across the board. Now, when I move into the non-G20 OECD economies, here actually you see that there are 16 of the 26 countries shown in this chart. So 16 of the 26 non-G20 OECD economies, we have projected a significant downward revision in our economic projections. Why do we have more red bubble in this slide than the previous one? These are small and more open economies, and actually these economies are more sensitive to global energy supply shocks. They're also higher reliance on imported energy and more specialized economic structure. As a result, the global prices tend to feed more rapidly into domestic growth and into inflation. Now, the Secretary General pointed out that we have 2 scenarios precisely because there is so much uncertainty about the evolution of the conflict in the Middle East. So here it is actually the persistent disruption scenario. We definitely hope that this scenario will not materialize. But this assumption, this scenario assumes that actually energy price stay much higher for a much more prolonged period of time, well into 2027, and actually the disruption in energy production and export in the Gulf economies will persist well into 2027. Now, I think the numbers speak from themselves. In this case, and this is the purple bubble, the world economy will move from 3.4% growth in 2025 to 2.1% in 2026 and only 1.8% in 2027. Now, let's pause for a second about this 1.8% growth for the global economy. This is less than half of the average growth of the global economy in the past 25 years. So this is indeed a major slowdown in economic growth, and no question this will pose severe challenges for everybody, for consumers, for companies, and certainly will pose also severe challenges for policymakers to actually respond to these challenges. Now, all countries will be affected, but as you can see in this slide, the Asian economies will be particularly affected, especially in the prolonged disruption scenario. They are more exposed to basically energy product from the Gulf region. You can see that there is a significant further deceleration in economic growth. This is the difference with respect to the time-limited disruption scenario. At the same time, global inflation will increase further by 0.4 percentage point in 2026 and by 1.3 percentage point in 2027. There is no question that this will create very difficult macroeconomic trade-off, especially for monetary policy. So the Secretary General mentioned a number of the risks facing under both scenarios. I'd like to focus on just a few of them, which are, in my view, also very important. So far, we have focused in particular on the impact of the energy crisis on inflation and on growth. But let me focus on one important additional measure, and these are the risks to affordable access to food in some of the low and middle-income countries. This chart illustrates the significant dependence of many developing and emerging economies on imported fertilizers. Actually, as you can see in the little dot at the top, they depend entirely on imported fertilizers. But what I'd like you to focus on in particular is actually on the red bar on this chart, because this points to the dependence of fertilizers coming from the Gulf region. And if you see the countries on the left-hand side, they depend significantly on imported fertilizers from the Gulf region. In countries like Sudan, the Central African Republic, Namibia, Mozambique, they depend in between 40 to 70 to 80% from imported fertilizers from the region. So limited access to fertilizers could reduce crop yield, and this can actually raise food insecurity, especially for the poorest and the most disadvantaged households in these countries. Another risk is what the Secretary General referred to, and this is related to trade tensions, but also I would like to say the uncertainty surrounding trade policy. This blue bar shows you are the evolution of U.S. effective tariffs, import tariffs, from December of 2024 to November of 2025. You see a significant increase, but also significant heterogeneity across countries. Now, if I look at the most recent evolution from December of 2025 to the most recent data, you can see that there has been some reduction in tariff rates. And also, if you look at the green little dot, shows that there is less differences across countries. Since then, indeed, the U.S. tariffs have been lowered significantly across countries. However, additional trade measures, including temporary broad-based tariff and sector-specific restrictions, continue to weigh on global trade flows and also on investment decisions. Let me say that the uncertainty matters in its own right. When future trade conditions remain unclear, firms tend to reduce their decision on investment, on hiring, and this actually can be particularly important in capital-intensive sectors and in highly integrated global supply chain. Let me focus on one possible upside risk, and this is linked to the rapid advance in artificial intelligence technology and actually the strong optimism that surrounds them. As you can see on the left-hand side chart in this, there is no sign of momentum fading. If we look at the planned investment by major AI companies, both for 26 and for 2027, this is expected to almost double the level of 25. So this is a significant, strong investment in artificial intelligence. There is a lot of uncertainty, but the potential gains are also large. According to the OECD estimate, which you see on the right-hand side panel here, a broad adoption of artificial intelligence combined with complementary investment in traditional software would actually raise annual GDP per capita growth on average in the G20 economies by some 0.4 percentage point. And if you look at the country on the right-hand side, in countries like the United Kingdom or the United States, this can go as high as 0.9 percentage point. If this benefit were to materialize, AI investment and the associated impact on productivity could definitely represent an upside risk to the outlook. However, this benefit cannot be taken for granted. The Secretary General referred to that. Of course, the energy crisis we are living in will raise the operating cost of data center. 60% of the operating cost of data center depend on energy, can constrain the supply of critical hardware, including microchips, and actually can amplify the financial risk if growing debt-financed AI investment fail to deliver on the expected returns. So far, we have been talking about the different challenges facing the economic outlook. Let me now focus on the key policies. First of all, I think focusing on monetary policy, there is simply no questions that central banks are facing a very difficult balancing act. They need to contain inflation risk while avoiding, at the same time, unnecessary sharp slowdown in economic growth. In principle, central bank can look through a temporary increase in headline inflation, which is brought by higher energy and food prices. This, I think, will be more consistent with our time-limited disruption scenario. As it is shown in this slide, indeed, the short-term inflation expectations have increased, reflecting the increase in energy and food prices. However, if we look at longer-term expectations, they tend to remain broadly stable. This suggests that market and households, for the time being, are expecting inflation to return to our target over time. Nevertheless, of course, the central bank may have to intervene, especially if energy price pressure proves to be more persistent, and there are signs of spillover more broadly into underlying inflation. Now, the Secretary General highlighted that this fiscal space is actually limited in many countries and the very strong importance of ensuring continuous progress towards fiscal sustainability. In response to the energy crisis, government actually acted pretty swiftly, rolled out a range of measures to support both households and firms. You see the measures that we have collected through our energy support measure tracker. But perhaps in this context, it's important to recall some of the lessons we have learned from previous energy crises, the famous 3T. Measures have to be timely, measures have to be targeted, and measures have to be temporary. So certainly, measures have been very timely. Countries have rolled out a number of measures across the board, but so far, most of the measures have focused on reducing energy prices, either directly through tax systems or subsidies. They are faster to roll out, and certainly they are much more visible. The problem is actually the second T, so the targeted measures. And you can see in this slide that actually most of the measures that countries have introduced have not been targeted. So why targeting is so important? It is important because we know very well that low-income households are more affected by a hike in energy prices. They spend a larger proportion of their income of energy. Rural households actually may have less means to adjust, for example, their transport patterns, and small and medium-sized enterprises may face less liquidity to adjust to the higher energy bill. So well-targeted measures can protect really the most vulnerable groups and firms, and at the same time at a lower fiscal cost. The other key lessons we have learned from previous energy crises is also to ensure that support measures are temporary. So as soon as energy prices tend to normalize, they have to be withdrawn. But let me add actually a fourth T, which is transformative. We need to make sure that the short-term measure to support households and firms actually preserve incentive for energy efficiency and for diversification. In this context, price signals actually do matter very much. Measures such as tax reduction, subsidized price, regulatory price cap, and export restrictions, so all the measures you find on the left-hand side of this chart, basically do not really encourage energy saving, do not reduce consumption of energy at a time in which we need that because this is an energy supply shock. But actually preserving price signals can actually reduce the dependence on fossil fuel, and this is very important because we have to make sure that short-term measures actually strengthen rather than delay the longer-term resilience effort that many countries around the world are actually undertaking. So let me conclude with some key messages emerging from our economic outlook. First, the conflict in the Middle East has become indeed the dominant force shaping the global economy. We now expect a weaker global growth, high uncertainty, and certainly a much more challenging economic environment. The longer the disruption lasts, the greater the economic but also the social cost of this crisis, and certainly will make policy choices much more difficult and hard. These are the main messages I would like to convey with you, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Stefano, thank you very much. We will enter into the question and answer part of the session. Invite the Secretary General back on stage. We'll be taking questions from journalists here in the room, but also those on Zoom. If you feel like putting your questions into the Zoom, we'll try to get to as many as we can. We'll start with those here in the room. Right here, I see. Go ahead.
Good morning. William Harbin from Bloomberg, to your right. The US this morning has announced 10% tariffs across the board. How does this announcement impact your assessment of the economic outlook? And a second question about your prolonged disruption scenario and monetary policy. Could you expand a bit on how you expect central banks to react in that situation and the risks of policy errors?
Well, on the tariff rate, these are not included in our projection. Of course, it would have an impact on economic growth. On the second question that you ask, the prolonged disruption scenario is a model-based simulation. Again, as I said, we assume that energy price will stay much, much higher for a much more prolonged period of time, and also the disruption in energy production in the Gulf region will continue. There is no question that while monetary policy can lock through the temporary increase in headline inflation in the time-limited disruption scenario, if we move into a prolonged disruption scenario, monetary policy would have to probably intervene by raising interest rate. Of course, they will face a very difficult balance on the one hand to secure that inflation expectation remain well anchored on the one hand, but on the other hand, also try not to sort of affect economic growth too. So obviously, they will facing the degree of challenges that the monetary policy and actually fiscal policy will be facing will increase as we move from the time-limited scenario into the prolonged disruption scenario.
I see another question over here.
Ángel Calvo from the Spanish press news agency EFE. In the previous reports, you have repeatedly said that in the case of Spain, migration has been one of the main contributors to growth. Now there's a regularization, perhaps 500,000 or even more people are going to be regularized. And so what will be the impact of this event if you have evaluated it?
Well, certainly we have taken into account the different policies that the Spanish government has put in place. In Spain, we are moving from 2.8% growth to 2.2% growth in 2026 under the time-limited disruption scenario. I think one of the drivers of the solid growth in Spain has also been a strong labor market, and I think there's been a long-standing policy for actually regularization of migrants. So, of course, this has been one factor sustaining also the Spanish economy. One important point to mention here is not just the regularization of migrants, but to make sure that they are fully integrated into the labor market. So you need policies actually to promote their full access into the labor market so that they can really give the kind of contribution they can to the economy in Spain. So Spain is actually a good interesting case also because of the diversification of energy and rely less on fossil fuel, and this is one of the factors that actually has led the Spanish economies to basically withstand this energy crisis perhaps better than other European countries.
I see another question right over here.
Hello, Martin Powell from AFP News Agency. In your worst case scenario, what are the countries that are more likely to enter a recession, according to you? Thank you.
Well, I think, as we have said, basically the Asian economies are more exposed, but I think there is a significant difference also within this region. There are some countries in the Asia region that actually have larger strategic reserves, so they can withstand even a prolonged period of high energy prices better. Other countries in the Asian region actually have less reserves, and for them, of course, a prolonged disruption scenario will be certainly much more painful. Small and open economies tend to be more affected by a prolonged slowdown in economic activity. But if you talk about recession, of course, we have to look at those countries where already start, even in the time-limited disruption scenario, from relatively low economic growth, and these affect, for example, a number of European countries that have a slow growth also in the more benign scenario, again, the time-limited disruption scenario.
I'm looking if there are other questions here from the media. If not, we have one from the journalist watching us online. Paolo Levi from this Italian agency ANSA asks, what are your principal suggestions for Italy?
Well, of course, Italy is facing a number of challenges. You see in our projections that in Italy growth will be 0.5% in 2025, and then will go up slightly to 0.6%. I think the full implementation of the Resilience and Recovery Plan is an important objective for Italy. I think maintaining the process toward fiscal consolidation is also very important. But also, I think, as the Secretary General said, there are a number of important structural reforms that will be important for Italy, improve the business environment, allow new firms to enter the market. Italy has an interesting situation because you have a very highly productive medium to large firms. Actually, they're even more productive than those in other European countries, but has many, many firms with very small firms with less than 20 employees that actually have very low productivity level. So supporting them, for example, into the transition by using artificial intelligence is certainly an important challenge that Italy is facing. And I think all countries, not only Italy, can certainly benefit by greater use of artificial intelligence, not only in the private sector, but actually in the public sector. There is significant improvement in the efficiency of public sector by using properly artificial intelligence and in particular generative AI.
Looking one more time if there are any other questions here from the media in the room. I see one final question right there, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur Wamoussi, Dubai TV. J'ai une petite question concernant la crise de droit d'Hormuz. Vous avez parlé une partie très importante dans votre rapport sur ce sujet. Il faut combien de temps pour sortir de cette crise? Et en cas de prolongation de fermeture, est-ce que l'OCDE dispose des scénarios pour faire face à cette crise mondiale? Merci.
Well, we do not know exactly, when the conflict in the Middle East will be sorted out. The reason why we have actually not a baseline and then different scenario analysis, but we have two scenarios, is precisely because of the very high uncertainty surrounding a lasting resolution of the conflict in the Middle East. I think the Strait of Hormuz is a fundamental choke point. I think this has been mentioned. It's not just for oil and gas. It's about fertilizer. It's about a number of fundamental industrial input. This is why we presented the prolonged disruption scenario, in which we assume that the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed for a period of time. And this, of course, as we've been discussing, the Secretary General and I, will have a very dear economic consequence, but also social consequences. We all hope that there will be sort of a lasting resolution of the conflict in the Middle East soon, and that we can move from the prolonged disruption scenario more into time-limited disruption scenario. I think this is the hope of everyone. But I think the important point of this outlook is also to prepare in case this crisis will actually continue and actually think about what kind of policy responses have to be put in place. These will be difficult choices that government would have to make to actually support consumers, to support firms, and to actually to weather what could be a very severe crisis.
Thank you. Stefano, Secretary General, thank you very much. We're going to close this press conference now. All the information on the economic outlook is on the OECD website. Thank you very much.
Seats as quickly as possible. We ask that everyone please take your seats as quickly as possible. Should you need interpretation, you will find the room audio on channel 0, English on channel 1, French on channel 2, Spanish on channel 5. Distinguished guests and delegates, please take your seats immediately. Distinguished guests and delegates, please welcome the Secretary General of the OECD, Mr. Mattias Cormann, the 2026 MCM Chair and Prime Minister of Finland, Petteri Orpo, the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Taras Kachka, and the MCM Vice Chairs, Korea and New Zealand, and Ministers for the MCM Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats immediately and turn your attention to the screen for remarks from the President of Finland, Mr. Alexander Stubb. Please take your seats.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying that I'm a big admirer of the OECD. Why? Because it delivers. It delivers evidence-based solutions that policymakers can put to work as they seek to strengthen their economies and tackle societal challenges. Moreover, it delivers on a global scale. The OECD soft law instruments make international economic cooperation stronger, more effective, and more predictable. As we seek to draw on the OECD's capacity to address the current emerging challenges, there are 4 points I believe we should keep in mind. First, we are a community underpinned by shared values such as democracy, human rights, rule of law, and market economy. The OECD's model of building solutions among like-minded countries has proven its worth. In these times of geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainty, we should make the best of this shared foundation and strive to maintain the OECD as an important anchor of the rules-based system. We need more OECD, not less. Second, and importantly, we need to ensure that solutions we build at the OECD can reach beyond our membership. This means that while the OECD can remain a platform for democracies, to make an impact, we need to engage also countries that don't share all of our values and convictions. The real value of the OECD, the ability for it to shape the global agenda, only becomes evident when we combine like-minded cooperation with a wider outreach. I'm convinced that there can be no meaningful global governance without the emerging global south. This remains true for the OECD as well. My third point is this: we need to get back to basics. As countries are focused to navigate an environment of expanding export restrictions and trade friction, we need to be reminded that open, rules-based trade is an essential building block for our prosperity. In today's world, trade and efficient markets are valuable not only as drivers of growth, they also help us diversify our value chains. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, my fourth point is the close link between economic prosperity and international peace and security. What the OECD does is crucially connected to the purposes of the United Nations: peace and security, international law, human rights and fundamental freedoms. Particularly, the OECD is doing a commendable effort in supporting the reform process of Ukraine and laying a foundation for its future economic prosperity. I look forward to seeing Ukraine as a full member around the OECD table in the future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Finland is honored to chair this year's Ministerial Council meeting. These 2 days will provide you an opportunity to seek common, knowledge-based solutions to issues underpinning our policies and affecting our future. I wish you a fruitful Ministerial Council meeting. Thank you.
We now invite to the stage the Secretary General of the OECD, Mr. Matthias Cormann.
To our chair, Prime Minister Petteri Orpo of Finland, Prime Minister Luis Arroyo Sanchez of Peru, President Guy Parmelin of Switzerland, ministers, excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends all, a very warm welcome to this 2026 OECD Ministerial Council meeting on getting industrial policies right for open markets, growth and prosperity. This morning, we released the OECD Economic Outlook. The global economy is under pressure. The Middle East conflict has disrupted energy and commodity markets. Growth is down. Inflation is up. Fertilizer prices such as urea have risen sharply with implications for food prices and food security. Financial market volatility has risen. Supply chains are being tested again, and all this comes on top of deeper pre-existing structural challenges. Productivity growth that has been too low for too long, a fracturing of the global rules-based trading order, inequalities of opportunity fueling political polarization, population aging, weighing on growth and pressuring public finances, and digital and climate transitions requiring investments at a scale and speed governments have yet to match. And each of these structural challenges has an industrial policy dimension. Each requires governments to make hard choices about what to do, what not to do, who to work with, and how to work better together. Which is exactly what we are here today and tomorrow to address. Governments everywhere are rethinking their role in the economy. The pandemic exposed vulnerabilities in health, economic, and societal structures and in global supply chains. The global rise for leadership in AI, semiconductors, and quantum is intensifying. The pressure to secure reliable, affordable, clean energy is mounting, and the window to get it right is closing fast. And citizens are demanding that growth delivers tangible benefits in their own lives, not just in aggregate across the economy. It's against this backdrop that industrial policy is back, and it is back with force. And the question then is not whether government should act. Governments are acting and they will act. The question is how to act and how to act wisely. Because the evidence of history is quite clear. Yes, industrial policy can help unlock stronger growth, more innovation and increased resilience. But it can also distort markets, crowd out private investment, stifle innovation, undermine fiscal sustainability and trigger costly trade conflicts, undermining growth and living standards over time. The difference between success and failure lies in how well industrial policy is designed, and even more importantly, how well it is implemented. Well-functioning markets and open, rules-based trade remain the most effective foundation for industrial success. Good industrial policy works with the market, not against the market. And the conversation that we're having over these next 2 days is also taking place against the backdrop of widening global economic imbalances, with persistent surpluses in some economies and chronic deficits in others. The cost of leaving them unaddressed is rising, but both surplus and deficit countries have real adjustments to make. Deficit countries must save more and spend less. Surplus countries must consume more and export less. And some deficit economies face an additional urgent challenge, closing a competitiveness and productivity gap that has been allowed to widen for too long. Coordinated dialogue is not optional. Without it, the pressure will continue to build, and the risk of disorderly adjustment with all the damage that brings to global stability and growth grows with it. It means, for surplus economies, rebalancing means more than shifting from investment and exports to consumption. It means moving away from market-distorting subsidies toward more market-based approaches, the kind that generate durable, efficient growth rather than dependencies that are hard to unwind. In this context, this week we released our OECD Magic Database, a unique tool to track industrial subsidies globally at the firm level, shedding light on their distortive potential. It covers 15 sectors and 525 companies, and it shows that industrial subsidies are widespread across sectors and regions, that most are modest relative to firm revenue, but significant in terms of profit margin. This is particularly the case in heavy industries and strategic sectors, and one pattern stands out. Firms based in China receive substantially larger support than firms in OECD countries, primarily through below-market borrowing from state-controlled banks. Such policies have contributed to the widening of unsustainable global trade imbalances. They have also enabled China to accumulate powerful positions across key industrial supply chains. The concentration of supply in strategically critical sectors now represents a systemic risk to the resilience of the global economy. Having access to this data makes honest, evidence-based conversations possible. The findings and implications make them necessary. The OECD is available as a platform to facilitate this dialogue in support of bilateral and plurilateral conversations. So what does good industrial policy deliver? It starts with productivity. The single most important thing any government can do for its industrial base is support broad-based, stronger productivity growth. Cutting red tape, investing in skills, funding research and innovation, promoting gender equality as a participation and productivity enhancing measure, building world-class infrastructure and addressing the digital and energy transitions, not as a cost to be managed, but as a necessary investment to secure international industrial competitiveness into the future. But good industrial policy also requires something no country can provide alone. It requires partners. Supply chain resilience, technology leadership in AI and beyond, critical mineral security, the clean energy transition, none of this can be achieved by any one country unilaterally and on their own. And what a powerful coalition of partners is gathered here today. Our discussions will not only shape outcomes within our own borders, they will also have an impact on emerging and developing economies that rely on continued access to open markets and clear, predictable rules. That is also why it is so important we get the balance right. With industrial policies that support global development and growth and that preserve and enhance opportunities for people all around the world to participate in and benefit from that development and growth. Over the next 2 days, you will address the defining policy challenges of this moment, how to use industrial policy to strengthen your economies while remaining true to the open markets and rules-based trading system that has been the cornerstone of economic strength over the last several decades. We should approach these discussions with pragmatism. Progress in any multilateral setting requires a commitment to listen to each other, to communicate, and to engage. And yes, when necessary, to find compromise. The ability to find common ground, even on difficult issues, even with partners you sometimes disagree with, is not colleagues and friends, let's get to work. But first, very much looking forward to hearing from our chair, the Prime Minister of Finland. Please, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, first, there is a slight addition to the program. In keeping with the topic of our meeting, industrial policy, we decided to bring with us a special guest from Finland. Straight from Lapland, I would like to welcome our most famous spokesperson for industrial manufacturing to the States. His factory staffed by highly skilled elves and trusty reindeer has kept our Christmases supplied for centuries. He is truly a national champion. As you know, he is someone who delivers. Welcome, Santa Claus. I believe you have something for Secretary General. Thank you, Santa Claus, and thank you, Matthias. Now let's get to the business. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Finland is honored to chair this Ministerial Council meeting for the first time in over 30 years. I would like to thank you, our co-chairs and the Secretary General for their close cooperation. Evidence-based policymaking is essential for navigating today's challenges. The OECD's role in promoting rules-based international cooperation is more important than ever. The theme of our meeting is getting industrial policy right. I would like to focus my remarks on growth, competitiveness and security. Let me begin with growth. Across many OECD economies, productivity chains have slowed, populations are aging, and public finances are under pressure. Digitalization, decarbonization, and defense needs are driving structural changes in our societies. As we seek to seize these opportunities, industrial policy has re-emerged as a key tool for countries around the world. When done right, industrial policy can support economic transformation. Poorly designed, however, it risks distorting markets or weakening fiscal sustainability. The challenge is to pursue targeted, non-distortive and non-discriminatory policies that strengthen long-term growth without undermining public finances or the free market. Governments must not replace markets, but rather enable them to function better. This includes designing regulation that supports competition and innovation, reduce unnecessary administrative burden, and ensures a level playing field for companies. Finland's success has relied on strong integration into global value chains, a stable and transparent regulatory environment, and close cooperation between public and private sectors. Having said that, the times are changing. Not all our trading partners are playing fair, for example, in terms of access to key production inputs. However, if we adopt smart industrial policies and pursue international cooperation with like-minded partners, I am confident that we can find the necessary solutions and ensure the global competition remains fair and rules-based. We are here to find these solutions. My second message concerns competitiveness. It is about the ability to innovate, to attract talent and investment, and to adapt to societal change by embracing the industries of tomorrow. These are increasingly linked to emerging technologies. Artificial intelligence, in particular, holds the potential for gains in productivity, innovation and industrial renewal. Competitiveness means establishing innovation ecosystem that enable different stakeholders to collaborate across the value chain. It means building research infrastructures where different technologies and disciplines can converge and interact. It means providing research and development funding for deep tech to be turned into real-life solutions. And finally, it means making sure that research institutions and companies have access to the talent and capital they need to innovate and scale. In Finland, we have developed world-class knowledge and manufacturing hubs in AI and quantum computing, wireless networks, new space, nuclear energy, and bioeconomy. We have a national spending target of 4% of GDP for research and development, ensuring our innovators a sustained funding pipeline. In addition, we are investing in our most innovative companies so that they can scale and compete in global market. All this is carried out in close collaboration between public and private sectors in a joint national effort. Yet, given the global nature of technology value chains, we also need trust international cooperation. And this brings me to my third and final message, which concerns security. Today, economic security and national security are increasingly interconnected. Supply chain vulnerabilities, dependencies, and geopolitical tensions affect our collective resilience. As advanced economies with shared values and interests, we need to find common solutions to shared problems wherever possible. Addressing concerns about economic security requires coordinated and proportionate action. We must build industrial capacity in key sectors while recognizing that we cannot and we should not produce everything ourselves. Second, we must diversify our supply chains while maintaining openness to global trade flows. Third, we must pursue deeper economic critical resources and technological partnerships among trusted allies. And finally, we must ensure that any measures we take do not undermine the very rules we are working to preserve. Much like growth and competitiveness, our security is not achieved in isolation. It is strengthened through cooperation. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine is a stark reminder of this reality. Our continued support for Ukraine is not only a matter of solidarity. It is in defense of the rules-based international order on which our economies deepened. Ukraine's resilience highlights the role of technology and innovation in building the defense capabilities and industrial capacity we need. At the same time, the reconstruction of Ukraine will require sustained international commitment. This also applies in the OECD context, and we can help Ukraine reforms its economy and pave the way for its membership. Learning from each other goes both ways. Excellencies, in closing, balanced and responsible industrial policies can be an important instrument in our toolbox. As a forum for mutual learning, policy dialogue and collaboration, the OECD is uniquely positioned to lead this effort. Let our discussions help us to get our industrial policies right in a way that strengthens growth, enhances competitiveness, and reinforces our shared security. Thank you very much.
Please welcome for the MCM Vice Chair, Korea, Second Vice Minister of Finance and Economy, Mr. Chang Hao.
Distinguished Chair Patrick Orpo and Secretary General Matthias Cormann, Vice Chair Todd McClay, and the Excellencies, fellow ministers and delegates. It is a great privilege to represent the Republic of Korea as a Vice Chair and address Ministerial Council meeting at this critical juncture. The theme of this year's meeting, Getting Industrial Policies Right for Open Market, Growth, and Prosperity, is the most pressing issue facing our era. Today, the global economy is confronted with polycrisis, a multi-layered web of challenges including the risk of entrenched low growth, geopolitical tensions, supply chain vulnerabilities, technological hegemony, the climate crisis, and rapid democratic shifts, etc. Amid this uncertainty, we stand at a critical crossroad where we must steer the global economy back onto a path of stable, dynamic, and resilient growth. At this historic turning point, the structural crisis we face also presents an opportunity to reshape the fundamentals of the global economy and achieve a higher level of prosperity. Today, under the spirit of a virtuous cycle of change built on shared trust, I would like to propose the core principles to collectively overcome the challenges before the international community. First, cooperation must be rooted in openness and rule-based order. Today's prosperity stems from connectivity, not isolation. We must uphold an international economic order based on open trade and investment, fair competition, and predictable rules. Recent efforts to diversify supply chains should not lead to market fragmentation or the resurgence of protectionism. Instead, they must serve as a means to make open economies stronger and more resilient. Second, our focus must remain squarely on innovation and productivity growth. The role of government is to foster an environment where innovation can thrive. By implementing competition-friendly legislation, we must build a level playing field where private creativity and investment can breathe and flourish. Third, policies must be inclusive, forward-looking, and fiscally sustainable. The rapid transformation of the AI era risks marginalizing workers and vulnerable groups while widening the gap between corporations. To address this, we must pursue policies that empower society as a whole and ensure that more citizens and the business enterprise share the fruit of growth. Furthermore, considering the potential side effects of the AI mismanagement or abuse, its technological potential will translate into real societal prosperity only when trust, safety, transparency, and accountability are firmly secured. Climate policy and economic growth must advance hand in hand through such green growth that accelerates green tech innovation and the low-carbon structural transition. We must simultaneously achieve both sustainability and a macroeconomic leap forward. In addition, the low birth rate, aging population, and the subsequent decline in potential growth rates pose serious threat to the sustainability of global economy. In this era of great transition, as the OECD has rightly pointed out, we must focus our strategic investment on growth potential. Through these structural efforts, we must secure fiscal sustainability and alleviate the burden on future generations. OECD plays a pivotal role in this era of grand transition through evidence-based policy analysis, pioneering discussion on international standards, and trust-based policy dialogues among member states. The OECD helps us make better choices. In particular, the OECD's initiatives regarding industrial policy, AI governance, supply chain resilience, trade and investment, and climate and inclusive growth are more vital now than ever before. In alignment with these efforts, the Republic of Korea is actively pursuing industrial policies and structural reform based on these right principles. We are simultaneously enhancing the competitiveness of our strategic industries and reforming regulations while firmly upholding the framework of a fair competitive order and international cooperation. Notably, while steadfastly maintaining fiscal sustainability, Korea is strategically investing in high innovative sectors like AI to boost our growth potential and create a virtuous cycle of growth where increased resources are reinvested into the future. Furthermore, for emerging industries and startups, we have adopted a negative regulation principle, competition-friendly regulation reform to maximize private sector dynamism. Distinguished guests, Korea's remarkable growth experience over past 3 decades was made possible because it has been firmly anchored in market openness, the promotion of competition, and private sector innovation. Now, we find ourselves in a challenging global environment. However, what we must truly pursue is not zero-sum game, draining competition between nations, but rather a race to the top for better policies that transform the very fabric of the global economy. We must aim for market complementing rather than market distortions, broader inclusion rather than exclusion, and long-term prosperity rather than short-term fixes. As a vice chair of this year's MCM and marking the 30th anniversary of our accession to the OECD, the Republic of Korea will strictly abide by the open trade order and actively participate in international dialogue on the digital supply chain and green transitions. Together with fellow OECD member states, Korea will fulfill its responsibilities in forging a more open, innovative, inclusive, and sustainable global economy. Thank you very much.
Now, for the MCM Vice Chair, New Zealand, please welcome Minister for Trade and Investment, Mr. Todd McClay.
Well, kia ora, bonjour, and good morning. I'd like to thank and acknowledge His Excellency President Stubb and Prime Minister Orpo from Finland for Finland's leadership of this year's MCM. Also for bringing one of your most well-known visitors to New Zealand every year. You're right, Santa Claus does deliver. Can I also acknowledge Vice Minister Hao Jun and fellow Vice Chair, and congratulate Korea on its 30-year anniversary of OECD membership. Thank you, Secretary General Matthias. We greatly value your work and that of your team in bringing together policy expertise and analysis on the increasingly complex challenges confronting the world today. New Zealand reaffirms its support to the OECD and is widely recognised and will no doubt be reinforced over the next 2 days. The current global geopolitical climate is at a concerning level. The OECD's evidence-based policy analysis is critical in helping all of us navigate current global shocks. These shocks are having real impacts on our economies and the livelihoods of our citizens. 12 months ago, I raised New Zealand's concerns about a worsening geostrategic environment, particularly the sustained pressure the international rules-based trading system is under. Sadly, a year on, and post-MC14, those concerns have only intensified, and the pressure on global rules-based trade continues to escalate. This strain is driving amplified global trade uncertainty and threatening global economic growth. We're also seeing pressure on international maritime rules and norms around territorial sovereignty and the use of military force. Some of this is playing out in events far from New Zealand, such as Russia's illegal war in the Ukraine and Iran's effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Other sources of tension are closer to home in the South China Sea. The implications of all of these events are far-reaching, and it's not only small economies like New Zealand which suffer because of events, we are all affected. It's precisely in times like these we must remember why institutions like the OECD exist. By utilising the experience around the table, we can work together, collaborate, and build trust to find consensus on solutions to common challenges. We commend the global outlook of the OECD, particularly the continued work under the Indo-Pacific particularly under the Indo-Pacific Strategic Framework. Today, we're also celebrating 10-year anniversary of the Latin America and Caribbean Regional Programme. We also commend the work of the OECD towards a new enhanced partnership with Africa. It is New Zealand's view that working with countries outside of the OECD provides real added value to the OECD. That's why it's great to see so many accession countries here at this year's MCM. New Zealand welcomes the progress made by all accession countries. And as we move through the next 2 days in Paris, and indeed as we work through our own economic issues over the coming months, I remind members that international trade rules are important. Rules provide predictability, certainty, confidence, and fair conditions. That helps our businesses to take risks, to innovate, to grow. It helps them trade with each other. In short, we all stand to benefit from adherence to rules which govern international trade and open markets. And I have had the privilege of working with many of you in the room on rules which govern cross-border trade and investment, supply chain resilience, and the digital economy, amongst many other areas. I close by referencing the importance of this year's theme, which centres on getting industrial policy right for open markets, growth and prosperity. At a time when many countries are looking inward, we remind members that industry policy should not become a proxy for protectionism or unilateralism. That benefits no one. I look forward to working with all of you over the next 2 days alongside Finland as our host and chair and Korea on the complex issues that face all of us. Thank you.
Please welcome from Ukraine the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Mr. Taras Kachka.
Good morning, so dear Chair, Prime Minister Orpo, dear Vice Chairs, dear Secretary General Corman and distinguished ministers, It is an honor for me to speak to you and to address OECD Ministerial Council meeting, take into account that OECD was one of the very first international organizations that condemned Russian aggression, and from the very first days of massive aggression helped us a lot in creating this enormous solidarity that we cherish and we really appreciate. It helped us to survive and to defend our territory and people and values and everything that is important for all of us. And that's why for me it is important to talk about industrial policy, because industrial policy is always perceived as something very selfish, something very egoistic. And but we know that we need to be together and promote solidarity among ourselves in order to survive and compete. So that's here I would like to break all the rules of speeches and start with something bad examples of what the discussion that we have on steel in WTO and here in OECD, and most recent measures introduced by the closest partner, European Union, are actually risking to damage Ukrainian economy on more than 1% of GDP. But I think that we will find a solution in the forthcoming weeks, and this risk will not be something negative that overshadow the very important and lifeline support that we got from OECD members, from all member states, from the European Union and other partners. And what the core element of this support is ensuring the resilience of civil life against Russian damages. And this is the core and the heart of industrial policy, because you helped us a lot in order to ensure that the whole infrastructure, energy infrastructure, telecom infrastructure and other infrastructure is operating. And we discovered how interoperable we are and where we are fragile in terms of supply chains and production of different spare parts or equipment. OECD helped us to ensure that this cooperation can work, so that our administration are working the same language. It's, you know, that it's, someone will say that it's thanks to teachers of English classes, but I rather say that we need to thank the public administration reform and OECD Sigma, that our administration and bureaucracy works and talks in the same language as you are, so that here OECD and many years of investment into reform actually helped us in the most urgent and difficult times. It is more than just public administration, so the policy on state-owned enterprises and ownership policy that we developed together with OECD experts and public procurements and many other reforms that have been implemented long before the war started help us to talk in the same language and help you to help us in this difficult time. So we really appreciate this work, and we need to continue with it, so that thanks to reforms we all managed to cooperate. This is the biggest lesson for all of us in this modern world. Final remark is about the new dimension of industrial policy. So OECD is an organization where a lot of peaceful policies were developed, post-war policies were developed. And unfortunately, now we have countries like Russia that want to make war a legitimate tool of governmental policy. And it's quite interesting that this war is damaging our industries, so in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world as well. But the most efficient reply to all this aggression and aggression against our civilization is industrial policy and production of weapons and other things that our defense industry use. And we started with military support of our partners, and we still rely on your support in conventional weapons. But the new weapon like UAVs and the ecosystem developed around it is a game changer in the investment in our future peace. And this is an ecosystem that combines human techness and managerial techniques, logistics and other things, and most of all technologies that are advancing so fast. And that's why we need to cooperate and to ensure that our industrial policy are helping us to defend our weapons. And here we need to ensure that we have a solidarity between all of us because we see that supply chain in this area should really be in line with security cooperation and solidarity. We need to avoid any dependencies on the markets and producers that share different values and compete with us in security as well. And when we are talking about trust, I think that the most recent invitation of Ukraine to anti-bribery convention and our joining anti-bribery convention is also another tool of building trust to each other. So just to conclude, I would like to say that all our experience with your support to us showed that when we combine our efforts in helping trade, economic policy and industrial policy, we can manage to win the wars and all competitions we face. So thank you for your cooperation and hope to cooperate in future as well. Thank you.
Please remain seated and thank again our speakers, President Stubb, Secretary General Corman, Prime Minister Orpo, Second Vice Minister Howe, Minister Maclay, and Deputy Prime Minister Kachka. Now, to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the OECD Latin America and the Caribbean Regional Program, we invite to the stage the Secretary General, the co-chairs, Costa Rica and Uruguay, Ms. Indiana Trejos Gallo and Ms. Valeria Sucasi, and for the host of the program's 2026 Ministerial Dialogue, Ms. Susana Sumelto of Spain.
Hoy celebramos una década de diálogo, cooperación y reformas que han fortalecido las instituciones de nuestros países y consolidado una agenda regional más integrada y orientada al bienestar y las oportunidades para nuestra población.
En este tiempo, el programa se consolidó como una plataforma de diálogo en un contexto regional e internacional desafiante. Ha desempeñado